Hello, my name is Peter van Eyck and my website is Computing.com. And in this video I will talk about how the National Security Agency, well known for hacking the entire world, actually works and how you can use cloud computing to protect you against that. So let's have a look at how the National Security Agency works. Its MO, so to say, the method of operations. So the first phase is reconnaissance. This is where the NSA figures out how your network looks like. And with network they also mean the computers that are on there. And they aim to know that better than you do. Because the better they know it, the more likely they will find cracks in there that you are not aware of. The next phase is initial exploitation. This is where they hack into your network. Now you might think that they're using very advanced techniques for that, but in reality they say that the easy thing is to just wait and wait and wait until somebody makes a mistake. Sooner or later somebody's going to leave a port open or have a piece of software that is unpatched and it has vulnerabilities that are exploitable basically. So this is where they find their first seam to crack. Then the next phase is establish persistence. This is where they try to install, where they will install software that allows them to come back. Backdoors, beaconing tools that phone home, and they will steal credentials to make sure that they can come back and come back and come back. After that, we have move laterally. This is where they hop from one machine to another, reusing credentials that they have acquired in the process, and with credentials they will get more credentials. We'll get back to that later in a second. Then finally the phase is to collect and exfiltrate the data that they were looking for in the first place. Now what can you do against the NSA? What can you do against the tactics of the NSA? In the reconnaissance phase, what you should be able to do is to know your network and your systems as good as possible and better than the NSA, because the better you know your stuff, the easier it will be for you to protect everything. In the initial exploitation phase, what you should be able to do is to patch your stuff automatically. Always have it up to date. Don't have any cracks left open, because there will be an automatic process to fix that. That's what you should be doing against attacks in the initial exploitation phase. Now, as for persistence and move laterally, this is where your previous controls will also help you. To counter the move lateral phase, what you should be doing is to segregate your network and the credentials a lot better and a lot more detail, because the finer grained it is, the harder it becomes for the NSA to move from one place to another. Then in exfiltration, what you could do is, for example, DNS reputation services that identify known botnets that data will be sent to, data leakage prevention tools, and a couple of things such as the protection against destruction and ransomware. Now this is not necessarily what the NSA is aiming for, but this is definitely something that you want to protect against. Have good offsite backups that are immutable. Now, what does the NSA hate because it makes their work harder? First of all, what they really hate is two-factor authentication, where you have an additional factor that you require to log into something. And that is obviously something that is very hard for a hacker to appropriate. What you should be doing, for example, is all admin accounts, all major email accounts, or email accounts for that matter, and stuff like that, to add two-factor authentication to that. What you should also be doing is segregate trust. Another thing is whitelisting IP addresses that you can work towards. Whitelisting applications using external reputation services such as DNS or external reputation services for applications. What the NSA also finds that makes their work harder is if the patching is up to date. And the way you should be doing that is to automate it. Really, this requires cloud thinking to do well. Then you need to apply secure host baseline practices. And in the final slide there is a little bit of information on that, on how to do that. Again, it is bringing stuff up to the right level. It's not just patching, it's also configuration. The other thing that they hate is not knowing if they have been found out. So if you do proper logging and proper analysis of logging, that's going to quicken detection of external intruders. Now here are some tips that the NSA gives themselves. You should limit access by users. Users should not have more rights than is necessary. In reality, people, in particular admins, tend to accrue and accumulate access rights. This has to be carefully considered and reduced. Don't overdo this, but people that have access rights that are 4 years old and haven't been reviewed in that period, that's bad. Patch parse the hash. Now parse the hash, if you look for that, it has to do with Windows networks. And once you're inside the Windows network, it can be very easy to grab any credential and use it to access other machines. This requires a little bit of detailed understanding of how Windows authentication actually works. There are countermeasures, but really this is something that you should be worrying about if you have a uniform Windows environment. On the other hand, proper segregation will help you against this. What you should never ever do is have hard-coded credentials in scripts or plain text passwords. I mean, these are just basically too easy to find out and appropriate. And the bad thing about hard-coded credentials is that they're very hard to revoke. Look at the logs and assume that your network, that somebody has gone past the initial firewall. Then properly work on that. Have off-site backups. As I said, this is really something that protects you against ransomware that encrypts your files. Because if you have off-site copy that is safe, has not been tampered with by that ransomware, you can basically use that to restore your environment. That's a lot easier. And then for server hardening practices, especially for Microsoft, there is a thing called EMAT, and there's a link later on. There's also an NSA information assurance practice. Again, there's a link. It's actually pretty reasonable and definitely something that you should be considering. Now, how to protect cloud computing based on these rules, based on these experiences? Well, we know that AWS, Amazon Web Services, is probably the world's largest hoster of botnets, but that does not necessarily have an impact on you, because protecting your stuff in the cloud should be easier. I just explained a couple of things that you need to be doing in order to have less risk of intrusion, lateral move, and exfiltration. And a lot of that required technology is available out of the box if you have your stuff run on a cloud native model. Think about segregation and stuff. Here's a couple of points. A cloud provider does account isolation for you. If you have multiple accounts on a cloud provider, especially on stuff like AWS, infrastructure as a service, the cloud provider makes sure that one account cannot get into another account. So you could use that to your advantage. In a cloud context, automated patching is a lot easier than in a non-cloud context. It's much easier to do hypersegregation of networks. In fact, it is actually hard to have open networks in such an environment. If you automate construction, configuration, and deployment of servers, then to have a fully controlled host baseline is easier, because basically you have a script that generates those hosts, and the script can be made up to date and then run again and again and again. Finally, because most cloud providers have very fine-grained access control methods that can be controlled over API, you can actually have dynamic policies. This is what Amazon is doing for themselves. If somebody needs to access a certain server in their core network, they get like a half-hour long credential, and after that it's killed fully automatically. Now that is cloud for you. Now here's a couple of links. Most of the stuff I was talking about is based on a presentation by Rob Joyce, who is the NSA TAO chief. TAO stands for Tailored Access Operations, which is like a nice word for hacking into your system. Another great paper is by the Sycorosis. Network-based threat detection has a lot of good models and processes. This is not for your average incident engineer. It is for somebody who's more in a managerial position. Here are the links to the NSA guides and the Microsoft EMAT guide. And finally, if you want to know a little bit more about cloud security, I've created a one-page Cloud Security 101 resource for you. If you go to my site, Computing.com, you will find a sign-up box for it. Okay, thanks for watching this. Goodbye.